Fragments of Silicon, making do with substitutions wherever possible. All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the Daylight Interviews. Joining us this week is Mark Bannister of Freemana Game Studio.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's Adam and I didn't get the other one's name.
I typically just go
Petty.
by Petty.
And Betty. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Indeed. Right. So, how we like to get started is we like to get to know the people behind the games, the studio, and all of that's assorted business. And we begin that journey by asking this particular question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Uh, it's a complex question, and as with a lot of things like this, it sort of has roots far back through life, and I'm sure that's the case for most people when they have sort of hobbies that sort of gradually turn into professions, that they're very passionate about. So, I've always enjoyed creating these sorts of things. As a kid, drawing big mazes, that kind of stuff, and then eventually getting into like Pokemon ROM hacks, that kind of thing. And I suppose it just grew. So I've always just been very creatively driven, and this just seemed like the logical conclusion. And so at some point, it was like, okay, well, may as well try to monetize this, seeing as I spend so much time on it. And and they have Freemana Studio.
Like, yeah, that is the basic bones of many a game dev that has appeared on this program, though the variances within can jump wildly.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean, we get as many people who went to university specifically for video games or something video game adjacent, as we do getting people who jumped into some facet of hobby development. So,
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, I did go to university, but not to study games specifically. Or at all. In fact, I'm a musician, and I'd studied composition at university, and so at the time I had a great interest in playing video games, and was of course interested in, as I say, ROM hacks and sort of um, RPG Maker and that kind of stuff, like really sort of low level kind of stuff, but that nonetheless took my interest. But really, it was about the music, and after that, I sort of was aware that I still really enjoyed just video games a lot, playing them, talking about them, so on and so forth, and so having the music became quite advantageous when it came to making games, because it's like, okay, well, I have a foot in the door when it comes to soundtrack design, and so that's sort of one part of it already covered.
it's also the area in our estimation that gets the least amount of coverage.
Mm.
To it, usually when we have people, they're programmers, writers, artists, very uncommonly musicians. So,
Mm.
Usually when people, like, even the solo devs, the one aspect of a game that they usually didn't make is the music. That they either contract out or they get some music royalty free or otherwise for their games. So
Yeah.
it's always a bit more interesting when we get this combination.
Sure, and there's really no shortage of when you start to advertise your game and you start to put out the information. One thing that you get a lot of, or that I got a lot of, I can't speak for everyone, but I imagine it's the case. You get email after email and Twitter message of people saying, "Oh, I'm a musician. Do you want music for your game?" Even to this day, having released Codex Lost months and months ago now, I still get emails like, "Oh, do you want music for your game?" It's like, hey man, it's been out for ages. The soundtrack's done. But there's loads and loads of musicians that aren't video game devs, but they want to do video game music. So certainly it puts me in an interesting position where it's like, okay, well, I don't mind working with other musicians, and I did work with a few other people for Codex Lost, but I'm in the position where really I've kind of got that covered, and less interested in hiring out that kind of work.
Fair enough. And as well as returning to the development timeline here, such as it is, at what point did you make the jump from hobbyist developer to professional developer?
I suppose it would. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like at what point did you do the monetization choice?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a very gradual slope. I suppose that the start of one of the dips, one of the peaks in the slope would have been the moment when I decided, okay, well, I need to, I'm interested in this stuff, and I've been interested in it for a while, so it's time to start experimenting with something that could potentially be more professional in the long run. And it was at that point, I can't remember what the year was, that I decided to get Unreal Engine 4. And at the time, and to this day, I don't know a line of code. I can't read any coding language, despite trying very hard to do so. So Unreal Engine spoke to me specifically because it has a system of coding called Blueprints, which is like a visualization in a kind of electronic format. By electronic, I mean that you're connecting nodes and cables in a sort of virtual simulation. And it represents all of its C++ coding in that method, which spoke to me, as a very visual person, that spoke to me straight away. And so I spent a year or two learning the ins and outs of that, and then did a few test games, and then eventually thought, okay, well, it's time to try and monetize something and make something proper,
Indeed. And do you do this full time, or is this a side development?
Yeah, it's a side thing. I have a proper job, as it were. But it's like over time, I reduce the amount of hours I do in my proper job, and then as I earn more money from video game design, one supplements the other. And the long-term plan, of course, would be to just be full-time game dev, but these things take time, so it's a many year project.
Yes. This is the goal of many a part-time developer. But it's the safer option, is what I'll say here.
Yeah, definitely. Like, although it means you can't put every hour of every day into it, I think it's much more sensible than dropping a job completely and then saying to yourself, okay, well, if I don't have a game done in 2 years, I'm done for, right? It's like, well, this way I get to climb the slope gradually, and it takes longer, but I think it is safer.
Right. I mean, some people don't take that route. Some people do exactly what you said. But takes all types, I guess.
For sure. Oh, and there definitely are stories of success. So and so quit their job and they had a smashing success with an indie game. Sold 20-30K copies or whatever, and they're great. Then they've got another few years to so on and so forth. But you hear more stories of the opposite of that.
Well, Yeah, it's a conversation we've had quite a bit on the program over the years, but especially in these times, um, independent of what's going on in the larger professional video game industry,
Mm.
the big conversation that's going on in the indie space, um, as it has been for quite a while, is just the congestion of things.
Yeah.
Every store is glutted.
Yeah, it's true. The market is very saturated, but it's not only saturated on the indie front. It's also quite saturated on the single, triple, and a double A front as well.
Right.
The main difference being that the sort of consumer faith and trust in the triple A and to some extent the double A space is really falling right off. Because of a number of blunders and bad decisions and so on and so forth in recent years. So the indie space is in a very interesting place right now.
Yeah, I wonder about that, um, because there's once again at the AAA level, um, there's a strange dichotomy, um, because to I guess oversimplify things, video games are making more money than ever, but um, the industry is, I won't say at its most precarious because there's not going to be a second video game crash.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
or-
if you're looking at it as a whole, I would agree with you that video game industry, when viewed as a whole conglomerate, is not really in a precarious position. But because it's grown in so many different directions, and it's become in many cases so politicized, you get these various arms of it, and certain arms definitely are poised on very precarious places, and other arms are in sort of quite a nice growth area. It's become video games are no longer this sort of niche industry. They're now a global economic powerhouse. And they're very wide and far-reaching and very versatile.
yeah, but we may be getting a bit off track here.
Yeah, yeah.
So to recenter things, what is Codex Lost for the uninitiated?
Mm. Um, well, Codex Lost is a third-person action RPG. Um, in the fantasy style, which focuses on exploration and combat. For those who are slightly more versed in terminology, it really is a Souls-like in most respects of the word, favouring difficulty. Though the place in which it diverts from most Souls-likes is it has less of an emphasis on difficult bosses and more of an emphasis on exploration.
Like, okay, so where to start here? I suppose first off, to tie things back to the previous bits of conversation, is what made you want to create this game?
Mm. Um, well, Codex Lost is fundamentally about magic. It's the combat is magic only, and it's all about collecting ingredients with which to craft spells, and it's all about a world which has really insane metaphysics and magic, insane magic surrounding its lore and that kind of stuff. Um, so I've always liked wizardry, wizards, magic, that kind of stuff. Whenever I do a playthrough of a fantasy RPG, if there's an option to be a mage, that's the option I'll take. For the most part, anyway. And so this is just a natural accumulation of the fact that I like magic gameplay and that the fantasy RPG is my favorite video game genre. So it's the combination of those things.
Indeed, I can at once see the connection and also find the end result a bit strange. That's because Souls likes are not really renowned for magic system. it's all about that melee combat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, Souls-likes are a very interesting genre, and as you say, a lot of people really like them for the intense melee combat, particularly against bosses. And whilst I do enjoy that, I don't exclusively play magic builds. I do play melee builds as well. Um, the the elements that I personally really enjoy of Souls-likes is the intricate level design that rewards exploration, the environmental storytelling,
Mhm.
these kinds of elements, and these are the elements that I really wanted to lean into because they speak to me so much when I play those games. And so Codex Lost really is, in terms of being a Souls-like, it's a very unusual product, as you say, but one which really heavily leans into those aspects, and doesn't really lean into the melee combat much at all. I mean, it's all spell based, although there are spells which are less about range and more about close quarters combat. So it emulates certain factors of the classic Souls-like experience in its own way. But it's a very strange sort of chimera of a game.
Mm. I'm like, and yeah, like magic can be fireballs, or it can be an ice sword. So that aspect, that's the beauty of magic. Magic can be whatever you want it to be. You know, yeah. Granted, that has the downside of people calling bullshit on it if it's too powerful or wildly out of control, or just pulling a rabbit out of a hat, basically. But given what you've told me here, I would imagine that your magic system here is based off of a lot of rules and spells and ingredients and reagents and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean the magic system in Codex Lost interacts with the world in a very strange and unique way. Like when you're playing a classic Souls-like and you want to interact with the enemies in the world, it's like, okay, well, do you like this moveset or that moveset? What's your upgraded weapon? Are you going to infuse it? So on and so forth. Whereas in Codex Lost, it's less of a sort of battle of stat attrition and more of a kind of puzzle that you piece together. It's like, okay, well, do you want to use a spell that creates a wall of light to prevent an enemy from coming towards you, and then do some sort of little spell ritual to buff a certain area, which you then stand in to do some other spell. It's a different approach to combat, which rewards less skill and more rewards careful thought and build concept.
Yes, I can see the appeal there. Honestly, it reminds me less of a Souls-like and more of the sim, the immersive sim. The game genre where you are given 1,000 different tools and you get to put them together as you see fit.
Yeah, that's definitely right. I only call it a Souls-like for a few reasons. One being that a lot of the design principles are quite directly inspired by the games which I like so much, which tend to be Souls-likes. But the other reason is because there are a number of mechanics in the game which mirror those of classic Souls-like, such as dropping your experience, which you then have to go and pick up, such as healing items that refresh at a resting location, and those kinds of things. But in its own spirit, it is, as you say, it feels slightly divorced from the genre in the purest sense, in that it is more like its own immersive fantasy experience.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it. It's also just, my vantage point is that some of the tropes of the Souls-like have become so popular that they're populating all sorts of other genres.
Yeah, for sure. It's
like,
Souls-like's become it is its whole own genre by now. It's become its own thing, and you do get cross-genre stuff going on in all throughout the video game space. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's more like getting action platformers that have the bottle that only has a certain amount of charges and
mm,
refills at the save location,
yeah,
or when you die, you lose all your gold and you have to go and recover that.
yeah.
I've seen those two things across a lot of games in these modern times.
Yes, I mean those two specific examples. There's a good reason that they're so readily taken up by other adjacent video game genres, and it's because they are just very good mechanics, and
Right.
they got introduced at some point, and everyone was like, oh, that's actually really good for X, Y, and Z reasons. They have a number of things that they achieve in terms of a video game mechanic, which makes a game more intense, less strenuous in terms of grind, that kind of stuff. They're just good mechanics.
Well, it's something that replaces the more archaic forms of punishment, like specifically losing your goal.
Yeah,
Um, that's a replacement for losing a life, um, and having to start back and losing a certain amount of progress.
sure. I mean, you can imagine, in the early sort of Crash Bandicoot games, for example, you can imagine that, let's say, when you died, you dropped a portion of your lives in the level, and then you had one chance to get back to those lives. It's like, well, you can imagine how much more intense and seat gripping that would make an already intense and seat gripping game, right? It's an amplification mechanic that got introduced at some point, and that's just video games, right? It's like we introduce new mechanics over the course of the video games life as a genre, and the ones that are good, they stick on.
Yes, I suppose that is usually the case. And switching tracks here, because
Mhm.
I don't want the conversation to be completely dominated by combat,
Of
especially
course.
given that you said that your main focus here in terms of differentiation was exploration,
Yeah,
though that's kind of like the other thing that Dark Souls in particular and associated family members are known for. The background lore, it's like there's a lot of 10-hour videos on this stuff for that franchise, is what
for
I'm
sure.
saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, what was your approach to environmental storytelling and exploration?
It's it's an interesting question because it's inherently a very complex question. I suppose the best place to start would be looking at Dark Souls 1, which a lot of people hold up as still the gold standard of level design. And we're all familiar with the world. We all understand how it's put together at this point. But just going through that world it's always mesmerizing. I suppose I really look up to that game, and to some extent Elden Ring, and the original Demon Souls, for their ability to pull you into the level, not because you want to engage in the combat, but because you want to see where the level's going. You want to see what's at the top or at the bottom of a level. The combat's there, but it's like interwoven into that experience. Uh, a good counterexample is, a lot of people in the last month or two have been going mad for the first Berserker, Kazan, um, which I have played, and it, I seem to be the only person that thinks it was just very boring. It's like the Souls like is just about the combat in that game, and the combat's very good. Don't get me wrong, but a level shouldn't just be there so you can do combat encounters. The level should be there because you want to explore it, and you want to explore the lore that the level is laying out for you.
I guess what I would say to that is different developers have different design philosophies.
Oh, absolutely. Like I'm not knocking the game. I think it's very well crafted, and for a person that does just want to do combat, that's a whale of a time. For me personally, it, it did not scratch my exploration itch.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And this may be a hard question to answer, but I suppose I have to give it a go nonetheless. And that is there anything you can point to that gives your game an extra special twist in terms of like all of the lore and so on and so forth? Like what is this place? Who are you? What are you doing and all that business?
Yeah. The lore and metaphysics of the game, in particular, as an example, um, are very complicated. Like there was one guy I was talking to, a friend of mine who helped with some of the advertising stuff, and who runs a Reddit group, which is all about Souls likes. It has like a living list of Souls likes, and he keeps them updated. And I was just trying to. He was grilling me about the lore, and I was trying to explain it. And I think, to quote, he said that it was batshit. So I would say that the lore, in particular, in that it's just this huge sprawling thing. But I suppose that's not so unique because the Dark Souls lore is also its own sprawling thing. But I would say it's the combination of the very strange lore and the fact that it doesn't, despite it being a big sprawling thing, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And by that I mean, in terms of the design philosophy, when I was building the game, very often I would decide to put things in or not, just based on if they amused me. So, for instance, the game is full of birds and bird references. There's one area where you can chase and slaughter some geese. The castle is called Castle Greylag, which is a type of goose. There's owls everywhere, blah, blah, blah. There's birds all over the place. And, the reason for that is I found it amusing. And so as I was building it, it's like, okay, well, you slowly incorporate that into the wider lore. And then, you as the player character are a curator who is half man, half bird, summoned from the realm of birds. I could go on. But I suppose that's the unique thing, is that it's both expansive and humorous lore.
Okay, I gotta say right there, that's a bit of a change from your usual Souls-like, because the genre in general tends to be very self-serious.
That's true.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing or anything, but not everybody can be the Dark Souls of Dark Souls.
There's only so much gothic you can take before it starts to get draining.
I'd say
that's absolutely
dark.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is one of the things that I think is interesting about Codex Lost, is that it's not so much about a dark world. It's all about color. It's full of vibrancy. Each magic school is very, very colorful and distinctly vibrant. And there's a bit more like Elden Ring, which is still a bit dark, but like Elden Ring, it has a very pronounced color theory. The various colors mean things which are all connected, and any area you go to, it won't just be some grey bog. It will have distinct color palettes.
Right, which, once again, it is a bit different than some Souls likes. Not all of them. Like, some of them do believe in color, but some of them do follow Dark Souls in that, yeah, you are very dark and gritty and brown and gray.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people, myself included, do really like the oppressive brown and grey palettes that some of these games. I mean, Bloodborne did it fantastically. It's the fact that it's all so dark and oppressive just all adds to this wonderfully crafted atmosphere. But that I would say, whilst I do love that, it's like one thing I wanted in Codex Lost was the vibrant palette, the whimsy. It's not a dark world. It's a world of whimsy and strangeness and fantasticalness, as magic should be.
Indeed. And along those lines, tell us about the grimoire, since those seem to be a big factor in the game here.
Yeah, the five grimoires in the lore of Codex Lost are five books written by a race known as the Ancients, who, at the time of the game, at the time of playing in the timeline of the game, they have since moved on to a realm which is kind of like a dimension of their own creation, leaving the five grimoires in the hands of the fledgling races who populate the central realms, which is where the player is. Each of these grimoires is like a magical tome, which can be leased out from a sentient library to grant the person who leases it very, very strong powers in order to help with grand architecture, governance, economy, that kind of stuff. But they eventually have to give them back, and if they refuse, the curator, the player, is summoned to hunt them down and bring them back to the sentient library where they are kept.
Okay.
This essentially means that the player is a librarian whose job is basically to go and pick up a bunch of truant books.
Right. Hence the title, I suppose.
The Codex Lost, that's right, yeah.
And let me see. So, how long did it take you to make Codex Lost?
I suppose it would be 2.5 to 3 years, I would say.
Okay. That is about as standard as it gets for game development, as at least as we've seen. Like, it's just so many game devs on that have graced our halls have given that time frame 2 to 3 years, and
Yep.
it doesn't really seem to matter the kind of game that they're building. That's like the average amount of time. There are some.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some who've been faster. A bit rare there, but there are also those who have taken a lot longer.
Yeah, I
various-
mean, you do hear stories of the small indie studios, or if you just browse on Reddit, it's like, okay, well, this person's so and so. 6 years, 6 years plus. It's like, oh, that to me that seems like too long. I mean, and maybe it'd be a fantastic game, but and who knows how long I'll spend on the next project. But hopefully, no more than 3 years. I think 3 years is about right.
Right, and once again, there are people who have strong and differing opinions about that. But regardless, are you a solo dev, or did you have a team help you build this?
I'm largely a solo dev, and when I say largely, mostly, I do hire out for voice acting, for example, and obviously I can't do all the testing by myself. I need to recruit testers, as it were. So it's like solo dev, but with the occasional bit of like mercenary work, that aren't technically part of a team, but whose services are occasionally required here and there.
We call them contractors.
Contractors, yeah.
Yeah, once again, it's fairly typical game development stuff. But I suppose one of the more interesting things for this conversation is your game has been out, at least on PC, for a bit of time now.
Since November of last year, it came out on PC and PS5 at the same time, which was November 14th, I think it was.
Yeah. So that's what, about 6 months?
Yeah, give or take, yep.
So that does beg the question, how well has Codex Lost been doing on the marketplace?
It's hard to know what a good benchmark of comparison is, really. It's done at least as well as I could have expected or hoped, which is fine. It's done well enough that I want to continue into the next project, and see if I can put everything I've learned making Codex Lost to better use, make something much more professional and much more tight and clean, which I expect I can, because it's all a big learning process after all. So yeah, it's done okay.
Okay. And I suppose in terms of development plans, are you are you or a game dev who specializes in this working on a, say, Xbox port or something for the Nintendo Switch?
So Codex Lost is published by Jandusoft.
Mhm.
They're the publishers that I reached out to, and that they had an interest in the game, and so that was all quite good, and they helped port it to PS5. We did try very hard to get it ported to Xbox and Switch, but the game is made in a slightly older version of Unreal Engine 4.27 or something, and this version of Unreal Engine is infamous for its architecture, which does not work very well with Xbox architecture. And so there were a number of bugs and issues which we couldn't work out how to resolve them for the Xbox. So we tried for like months, and we couldn't do it. The good news is I'm still going with Jandusoft for the next project, and we think that now using Unreal Engine 5.5, we will be able to get the next game to Xbox and Switch too.
Okay. Yeah, I gotta admit, I'm not super well versed on specific versions of Unreal Engine, so I will take your word on all that. Bit unfortunate, and I'm assuming Jandusoft couldn't get the game working on the Nintendo Switch just in general. As
Yeah, I mean, because I only knew, I was an inexperienced developer when it came to starting Codex Lost, and by the end of it, I knew a lot more. But of course, at that point, you've already built a game, right? And being inexperienced, the game isn't very well optimized. It's half game and half learning project for myself. And so it was nowhere near optimized enough to be able to run on the Switch. And in terms of it running on not being able to run on the Xbox, part of the problem was indeed optimization. It ran on the PS5 because the PS5 is quite powerful, and same with PC.
right. And I suppose my final question at this juncture is, can you tell us anything about the new game?
Sure, yeah. There will, in the coming days and weeks, I'm not exactly sure when, there will be an official announcement. But I think I'm allowed to say that I'm working on the sequel. So Codex Lost will be coming soon. Codex Lost 2 will be coming soon. But I can't say much more than that.
Okay. Okay. Because I suppose that is good to know. So the series will continue, and will continue in a new proper installment and not like DLC.
That's right. A new full proper installment, a fresh combat system, a new world, so on and so forth, and a much more expanded game, both in terms of functionality and interface. And this game will have melee combat as well. So very much a broadening of scope, and I'm hoping it will appeal to not only fans of the first game, because it will still lean into exploration and so on, but also to people who are fans of Souls-likes and dark fantasy games in general.
Mm. How do I put this? That's always a bit of a gamble, because yeah, they could latch onto the new system, but they could just as well hate that very idea, because it runs antithetical to what they found in the first game.
Yeah, for sure. If the the thing that mainly is changing is the fact that it's going from being just magic on its own to magic and melee. And don't get me wrong, the second game is still largely about magic. The player is encouraged to use spells, to use magical weapons. But if they want to go through the game with just a sword, then they can.
Hmm. Right. So I'll see if my colleague here has any further questions for you.
No, I think everything I wanted to ask was already taken care of.
Okay, then. Well, Mark, it was wonderful having you on the program and talking with you about Codex Lost.
Thank you.
No problem, no problem. Anyway, we'll probably reach out again when the sequel is ready to be talked about. Which,
Sure. Yeah, sure. Should be hopefully in the next few months, or at least sometime this year, we might be able to see a demo. Maybe. But yeah, I'd be happy to come back and to speak about that because it's been a pleasure talking to you.
indeed. Right. So, with that in mind, the game is Codex Lost. It is currently out now for PC and PlayStation 5. Is it PlayStation 5 or is it PlayStation Family there?
It's just PlayStation 5.
Okay. And you can pick it up for $24.99 USD. It's also got a soundtrack available for $4.99 on Steam, bundled together for $26.98. So be sure to pick it up today. Should you
And
desire?
of course, if anyone that wants not a digital copy, an actual physical copy, last month we did manage to get the physical copy down, so you can get that as well. It's a bit more expensive, but I think it's worth it.
So whatever way you choose, be sure to pick up the game today. All right, so yeah, that'll about do it for another installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to join us next time for the Sunday reviews. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.